So, just welcome to everyone who's joining this meditation with a talk. I'll be giving a talk I don't know quite how long it is, but it's quite long. And then there'll be, as usual, as always, an extract from a talk of Sri Mataji's in London in 1986, which kind of fits in a little bit with this talk. And then there'll be time for meditation. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was the epidemic of mental health issues that affect us. One of the problems we face as Sahaja Yogis trying to establish Sahaja Yoga, this great Mahayoga in this country, is that of this epidemic of mental health problems that have affected people, especially young people, in recent years. The data is stark. For instance, in May of this year, there were over 3,500 urgent referrals of under 18s to NHS mental health services. That's 3 times more than there were in May 2019, 4 years earlier. What's more, there were allegedly nearly 500,000 open referrals to children and young people's emotional, behavioral and mental health services in May this year. So 500,000 open referrals. I assume this means that they're kind of ongoing, but they're not necessarily, the children aren't necessarily being seen. Back in 2020, it was reported that 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16 were identified as having a probable mental health problem, a huge increase from 1 in 9 in 2017. That, as the writer points out, is 5 children in every classroom has a probable mental health problem. I don't know why I'm smiling, but I mean, it's just bewildering. Also, in 2018 to 2019, 24% of 17-year-olds reported having self-harmed in the previous year, a quarter of 17-year-olds, and 7% reported having self-harmed with suicidal intent at some point in their lives. Then there are the children who skip school with their parents' collusion because of anxiety. This has shot up since COVID, when they kind of got used to not having to go into school. It's true that we have to add a pinch of salt to these statistics. If you are asked, for example, if you have ever felt anxious or depressed, you might say, well, yes, while not regarding depression or anxiety as in any way defining characteristics of your personality. Also, I note that in a survey out this week, in which more than a quarter of the 2,000 teenagers polled said that they felt anxious all or most of the time, at least half of those anxious kids said that they felt anxious when they didn't have their phones with them. So that's kind of a trivial kind of anxiety in my view. It should also be said that social care is a business, and people in it, certainly the administrative class within it, are forever angling for more funding for the services they offer. There's also a distinct political motivation involved in a lot of these surveys. There's a feeling that the people behind them almost want the figures to keep going up because that gives them a bigger stick with which to beat the government. For instance, Laura Bunt, Chief Executive of Young Minds, describes the figures as indicative of a system that is broken and a government that has refused to listen to young people demanding change. Social engineers who want to redesign society in their own image love words like broken and change, because it's very much in their interest to create the idea of a crisis, which supposedly they alone can solve. Here it's noticeable that the one thing these people rarely, if ever, seem to mention is the role of parents. Parents can sometimes be seen in their eyes as contributors, as they sometimes are, to the problem of their children's mental health. but they are not seen as having the professional qualifications, training, or know-how to be able to deal with those problems, not without the help of experts. Basically, the state is seen as providing the answers. This is an idea that really begins with Rousseau, as I've been talking in previous talks. The family is an object of suspicion because it's an amateur, unlicensed institution, whereas the state, sort of anonymous but out there all around, is conceived of as some efficient organization full of an abundance of expert technicians in emotional behavior. This conception appeals to the ego, this futuristic, technocratic ego, but it doesn't have much to do with the way things actually are. But putting all this aside, the pinch of salt and so on, there is a real problem out there. I don't want to belittle it in any way. Why are young people so prone to mental health issues? And of course, I'm not forgetting for a moment that to the people concerned, those who are suffering directly and those who are suffering indirectly, parents, relatives, friends, in a way, the whole of society, these mental health problems are not small matters that can be easily dismissed. But where has this epidemic come from? And are we doing things that actually encourage it or make it worse? So it's a real problem, but naturally, we have to look at it from a Sahaj point of view. That is from the witnessing point of view of an attention that is in the center, in the present, in which case these mental health issues are unreal things. There's something illusory about them. They are instances of negativity. Anxiety has to do with the future, depression with the past, although we can be anxious about the future because we're in the left, and we can be drawn into the left because we are recoiling from having gone too far into the right, and so on. So it's a complicated business. But the point is that the experience of reality, is one of Satchitananda. We may not experience this all the time, or even much of the time, or only very rarely. But still, we have to at least know intellectually that reality is a state of clarity and a state of joy. It is not a state of anxiety or intolerable gloom. We are forever being asked to take up a sympathetic attitude towards these mental health disorders. But sympathy is not helpful at all. It is not a weakened or sort of watered down form of compassion. It's the opposite. It's the enemy of compassion, I would say. Also, most of these problems of anxiety and depression seem to be narcissistic disorders when viewed from outside. There's definitely a kind of narcissism in saying, I have a deep, deep problem because in a way I am a deep, deep, hypersensitive person. I can't help it. That's my reality. And therefore, you must walk on eggshells around me. Otherwise, it will be very, very damaging to me. And by the way, people will think you are a monster. This may not be said out loud, but it follows from the situation of a person who is over-anxious, who is deludedly anxious. Okay, it may be their reality to be anxious, but it's not a true reality. Also, it's hard not to feel, and I'm sure there's truth in this, that these disorders are due to something not being done that should be done in a person's life, essentially to focus on seeking and finding the spirit. But again, that's not to say these disorders do not exist and they can't be just wished away by talking about the spirit and so on. They do exist. But it's important to be clear that they are negative, they are disorders. They are not to be accepted as neutral things or as examples of an alternative, yet equal order. And that's the main thing I want to say. I mean, I don't have any easy answers to this problem, obviously, but this is the main point I'm trying to make. apart from raising the issue and trying to see it clearly. There's a term that's become popular these days, neurodiversity, sometimes neurodivergence. It's a very ambiguous concept. It suggests, and I've seen it used like this, that people with a mental disorder, usually one that's not completely disabling. I mean, we're talking about ones that are not completely disabling. That these disorders are, on the one hand, equal to ordinary people, just as transgender people are claimed to be perfectly legitimate kinds of people, worthy of being loved, etc. And on the other hand, these people with these disorders are just a little more interesting and special than ordinary people. And of course, in these days where the ideology of EDI, equality or equity, diversity and inclusivity, is everywhere, diversity is seen as unquestionably a positive thing. So why shouldn't neurodiversity be seen as a positive thing? This ambiguity of sort of wanting to have it both ways is very clear with people like the writer Marianne Eloise, author of Obsessive, Intrusive, Magical Thinking. This book, according to a review I read, catalogues her experience of a dizzying variety of psychiatric conditions: OCD, anxiety, autism, ADHD, alcohol abuse, seasonal affective disorder, an eating disorder, night terrors, depression. By her own telling, Eloise has suffered a great deal from these ailments. But she would prefer we not think of them as ailments at all. And that combination of self-pity and self-aggrandizement is emblematic of our contemporary understanding of mental health. The reviewer has a point. There's a good deal of this wanting it both ways, to have us sympathize with people afflicted by mental health issues, and to have us admire them for being different, to have us accept that they have a different kind of normality, and to say that actually there is no such thing as normality, that we're all a little bit crazy, and so on and so on. So it's a way of casting doubt on the whole idea of normality. We see something very similar in the concept of heteronormativity, the idea developed in the 1990s that heterosexuality is a privileged, culturally constructed norm. Or in other words, it isn't really normal at all. It is just one form of sexual behavior which has managed to gain dominance over other forms, and in doing so has painted them as being abnormal. Still, get back to the problem. Why is there so much anxiety? We can point to various causes. One is surely that we are living at a time when the ego is overdeveloped, at the expense of more communal, collective ways of experiencing the world, in which family, locality, community, country, religion are not just thought to be important, but are felt as a living reality to be important. The resulting atomized experience of this solidified futuristic ego then causes all sorts of problems, among them ones of excessive self-consciousness and anxiety. True, social media gives us a kind of substitute community, but it's a very different thing from a direct real-life community. And in fact, it often operates as an echo chamber in which children and adolescents meet fellow sufferers online, and their problems go into a spiral of getting worse and worse. Then there is the way that mental health problems have been normalized. I mean, this again is the main point. Whereas people would have spoken about such difficulties in much vaguer, looser terms in the past, now a kind of scientific sounding narrative has been constructed around them. They are mental health matters. The other day I gave a student an essay title to think about. The title was The Importance of Being Organized. Much of what the student said had to do with mental health, that if we're not organized, it can affect our mental health adversely, and so on. It struck me how common this idea of mental health has become and how different things were when I was this student's age, 17. No one talked about mental health back then, as far as I can remember, except where serious long-term mental disorders were concerned. Even nervous breakdowns were called just that. They were seen as exceptional things, exceptions to the norm. They were, whereas now mental health has become an everyday term applicable to more or less normal people, and which is discussed in much the same terms as physical health. I was just thinking about this yesterday when I passed a fire engine with a big poster all along the side of it for a local mental health charity. There was a picture of a fireman in action with the slogan, "Well, we are all powerful, strong, and resilient, but sometimes we struggle." The implication was that even the toughest of guys suffer from fragile mental health and need help. And if the toughest of guys do, then what about the rest of us? Related to this is the fact that having a stiff upper lip used to be seen in my youth as a good thing, especially among young men. Footballers hadn't yet started setting a different example by weeping and wailing on the pitch. A gay, sentimentalized form of male expressivity hadn't become a mainstream phenomenon, rather than merely a minor one, which was seen as entertaining but unquestionably off-center. Stoicism was considered a positive quality, while showing off one's inner problems in public was seen as an embarrassing indulgence in self-pity. Generally speaking, there was more self-restraint. There were exceptions. Beatlemania was one, sort of collective hysteria that gripped people, mainly young girls. But on the whole, there was more emotional modesty in the England of my youth. Increasingly, however, such emotional modesty has become a thing of the past. Here, Anthony Daniels, who's a writer I respect a lot, he usually writes under the name Theodore Dalrymple. He makes a very important point, I think, when he says that emotional understatement is much more powerful than overstatement, for it requires or calls forth the active exercise of the imagination to perceive and interpret it. We develop more subtle feelings, or can do so, by being required to imagine and intuit what others are feeling, rather than having those meanings spelled out for us by other people, sometimes by the people themselves, sometimes by patronizing intermediates, in which case there's nothing for the imagination to do, and rather than our having to cultivate subtlety, we are merely asked to show sympathy. When someone wins or loses at Wimbledon, for example, it's not too difficult for us to imagine their feelings. But that's not obvious enough for the people in the media. The winners and losers have to be asked in front of everyone immediately after the match, "What are you feeling?" or words to that effect. I saw Djokovic and Alcaraz being put through this ordeal back in June. And actually they acquitted themselves very well, I thought. But still, in a way, we are being infantilized by this treatment. It's as if we cannot guess what they feel. We are regarded as being unable to imagine what another person is going through. Everything has to be made transparent and a person's inner life exposed for everyone to see. Does this emphasis on demonstrating our feelings show that we have become more sensitive people? This is a common belief, but in the past, people were much more buttoned up and they bottled things up when they shouldn't. Whereas now we are much more open, expressive, and sensitive. I'm not sure about this. Isn't it more that we have moved so far to the right in our culture that emotions now seem like rare, exotic things, which must be brought under the spotlight and performed and exhibited and analyzed and so forth? We have lost also that gradation of expression, that subtlety of emotion, which allows for a whole range of different degrees of feeling. Reality TV in particular loves to see people either hugging or crying, anything in between, and the producers aren't interested because it's not obvious enough. But then not only does emotional reticence make for poor television, from the point of view of the right side egocentric project, the stoical stiff upper lip of self-restraint is now considered actually dangerous. According to the American Psychological Association, traditional masculinity, consisting of traits including stoicism, is psychologically harmful, causing damage both to a man's inner being and to the world around him. Meanwhile, as I say, people, men especially, are being encouraged to recognize the symptoms of mental health issues within themselves and to expose them to the world. Prince William and Prince Harry, his brother, used to talk a lot about this importance of opening up. I'm not saying there's no place for it at all in private, but then Harry started doing it in a very public, complaining, money-making way. The result is that one of these brothers has kept his dignity, the other hasn't. Perhaps the difference between them is that one has a Shakti for a wife, the other a witch. For celebrities, it's almost an obligatory part of their career arc that at a certain point they will open up about the bad experiences they had at home or at school, or about their mental health issues, which, although they have overcome them, are still there, lurking in the background, ready to pounce. Perhaps they issue these communiques about their mental health because they want to stay in the limelight, and this is a way of doing it. Or perhaps they open up like this because they want to make it clear that although they've become rich and successful, they have earned this the hard way and thoroughly deserve it and are not to be criticized. It's also a way of explaining away any bad behavior. Maybe I did this, but how could I help but do it when such and such was done to me, so on. They're telling us that they are not really the perpetrator, but the victim. Or maybe they have done a little bit of perpetrating here and there, but it's easily excusable because basically they are victims. Closely connected with this opening up about one's mental health is the public confession of moral failings. Nothing, indeed, is more revolting to English feelings, Thomas de Quincey declared when introducing his Confessions of an English Opium Eater, very interesting book, in 1821, and distinguishing his own approach from that of Rousseau and his followers. Nothing is more revolting, he said, than the spectacle of a human being obtruding on our notice his moral ulcers or scars and tearing away that decent drapery which time or indulgence to human frailty has drawn over them. Yet nowadays, the display of moral ulcers and scars has been made to seem both brave and therapeutic and even empowering to others. Again, TV has played a big part in this spectacle. Then there's literature. You can't say it began with Sylvia Plath, although she's certainly the patron saint of a confessional kind of literature. But it has come to seem a good thing rather than an embarrassingly self-indulgent, immodest thing, to parade one's flaws, to wash one's dirty linen in public. At least Robert Lowell and Sylvia Plath could really write. But with many contemporary writers, there's little or no self-editing involved. They just splurge it all out about the bad ways they were treated and their complaints against the world and so on. Amateurishness is considered a virtue in such literature, because it suggests rawness of emotion and authenticity. It's the same with punk rock and music. Of course, art involves a certain amount of self-expression. It involves a certain amount of expressing negative feelings, negative experiences. But what matters is the degree to which this negativity is transformed when put on the page or on the canvas or on film or in music. But I'll talk about that more next time. For now, I'll just conclude by saying that I feel the suspicion that has been cast on normality, the norms, normal behavior, normal moral behavior, etc., has created a big problem for us. There are definitely social and moral and mental and emotional norms. The fact that they cannot be defined precisely, they can't, but it gives shallow rationalists an excuse to argue that they don't exist at all, when they obviously do. Anyone with an atom of common sense knows that. Dharma exists, the central path exists, the way of evolution exists. So I sort of raised more questions than answered, but it's such a huge subject and it's easy to talk about it in general terms. But when someone brings before you a specific child with a specific mental health problem, much more difficult, I know. So going to play an extract from a talk. I'm sorry I've talked for so long, but this is a brief extract, about 6 minutes, I think, from a talk Sri Mataji gave in Wimbledon in 1986. And it sort of touches on this subject. Ironically, in the bit before the part I'm going to play, Sri Mataji says, there are no norms in Sahaja Yoga. But it doesn't really contradict what I'm saying, I think, because she's saying there are no particular standard ways of behaving, dressing, and so on in Sahaja Yoga. We're free people. But the kind of normality I'm talking about is just a general centeredness. That's all. Okay, so hand over to Priti if she'd like to play this beautiful talk.
Please be seated.
One simply said from the flowers from Shooty Camps, the garden.
May God bless you. Thank you. Beautiful.
Bit of us.
Thank you. Come along, don't sit on the, you sit on the carpet. All right. I will be going to India for a puja, as you know, because they say in the West most of the pujas take place and they never have a chance. That's why I'm going to India. And Navratri starts from the 4th. I hoped in these 9 days will clear out so many of your chakras. Of course, I'll be working on them, but you have to also cooperate. Watch yourself, find out what's wrong with you. Why the different chakras are catching. Now the attitude that we have towards ourselves and towards others has to be now changed in these new circumstances and in this transformation. The SYUK lifestyle is not a system, you know that. We don't want to create any systems, any norms in SYUK. But what we do here is to transform ourselves into selfhood, into the spirit state. By that, we change our attitudes. If our attitudes are not changed, then we have not achieved much in SYUK. The attitude first should be that we have to know that we are on the giving end, not on the receiving end. If that happens to you automatically, spontaneously, then you have achieved it. But supposing it does not happen, then you have to be on the watch out. First of all, you must feel the joy of being in the SYUK. If you cannot feel the joy, then there's something wrong with you, something wrong with your heart. Heart is not clean. You have to clean your heart. If you think of your past all the time, or past of others, then it's a wrong attitude completely. You have to be in the present. And the gloom and unhappiness, all these things are signs that yet you have not become your spirit. The attitude should be, what joy I can give to others, what I have given to others. And the giving is such a great joy that it cannot be surpassed by any other joy. So one has to think, what did I do for others? How did I help others? How much love have I given others? How much understanding I have of others? Unless and until you develop that kind of an attitude, you cannot enjoy life. People think enjoyment depends on others. The atmosphere is bad. I'll be happier in India, not here. Very common. It's not so. If you are fully aware that you are the spirit, you can enjoy all the other Sahaja-yogis which are here. So a person who cannot be collective shows that he is yet very much to be developed. It is not how much you have studied, what personality you have got, what kind of education you have had. That's not important. How much you can enjoy in whatever may be the circumstances, that capacity shows your identification with the spirit. You can see me, you have seen my life, how I can adjust myself to any circumstances. 1,001 thing I can do without getting worried about it or upset about it. I'm not saying that you can achieve all that, but still, you should have your ideals before. Now the part where we fail is that we start finding faults with others. This is the worst attitude. That makes you angry because we think you are in charge of everything. I've seen people going on the road, they see, say for example, a funny person passing through, or they find somebody who is not wearing a proper dress, or maybe he is walking in a funny manner. Immediately they get angry, as if they are the policemen, as if they are in charge of the road, as if they have to correct the whole world, and as if they are perfect. In Sahaja Yoga, if you try these old tricks, you can never be happy. Here, you don't have to see those things. Just close your eyes when you see any defects of another person. Such a person is always an angry person because he finds the whole world is after his life, or he finds that he has to get after the whole world. One of the two. It's a funny existence. It's a very disgusting, frustrating existence where you are all the time either angry with others or angry with yourself. This anger goes on multiplying. And once it goes on multiplying, then you become nothing but a mountain of anger. With the slightest touch, you get angry. Then they say this is our conditioning. It's not. But this is what you have gathered in this lifetime. It has nothing to do with your previous lives or anything. Nothing to do with your bhoots. Now, this one common thing in the West is this is my bhoot. As if to have a bhoot is a very big honor. In India, nobody would say that. Nobody would accept they have a bhoot. Because to say you have bhoot means you are a nonsensical person. How could you have a bhoot? That means there's something definitely wrong with you. You're a weak person. There's something missing in you. So one has to understand the attitude towards life is to be like this, that you give others joy, not find faults with others. This attitude has to be completely changed, of finding faults with others. Now, finding faults with yourself is also not necessary, because every day you are changing, every day you are blossoming, every day you are evolving. So it doesn't help to find faults with yourself. Like many people tell me that, Mother, I'm a very miserable creature and I don't know what to do with myself and this and that. And I've been always like this, I've been always an unhappy person. What is the need to be like that? If you have been like this, you have been stupid fool. That's what you have been. By God's grace, you have everything. What is there to be miserable like that? From your childhood, I have been like this. So what? If you have been from childhood, you have been a stupid fool. That's what. It doesn't give you a better place in society if you say it is from my childhood. Get rid of it.
So, the last 10 minutes, we'll have a meditation. So if we just put our attention to the spirit and forget all self-consciousness, all problems, all worries, all anxieties about the future, all things we have done or not. Just be in the present, where the love of God is complete reality. It's a beautiful description somewhere Mother gives of meditation, which is not abstract. It has no Sanskrit words or anything. It's just being in the companionship of one's Holy Mother. So to enjoy that companionship in our meditation. So, Priti, if you'd like to carry on with that music, Avanindra Shionika, that would be nice. And then at 9 o'clock we'll come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it for tonight. Thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you again soon.